Close your eyes and imagine a world that could have been. A world where the greatest empire in ancient history never crumbled into dust and memory, where the eagles of Rome still fly over a vast domain, where Latin remains not a dead language studied by scholars, but a living tongue spoken by millions, where the Senate still convenes, and emperors still rule and then the emperors still rule. This is not our world, but it could have been. One different decision, one different outcome, one fork in the road of history, and everything changes. In our timeline, the Western Roman Empire fell in 476 CE when the Germanic chieftain Odoacer deposed the last emperor, Romulus Augustulus, a boy whose name ironically combined Rome's legendary founder with its first emperor. But what if that never happened? What if Rome, at its moment of greatest crisis, found the strength and wisdom to adapt, to survive, to thrive? What would our world look like today if the Roman Empire had never fallen, but instead evolved, transformed, and continued through the centuries to the present day? This is not just a tale of battles won or lost, though battles will play their part. This is a story about how civilizations survive by adapting to new realities, how institutions can bend without breaking, how an empire might trade absolute control for lasting influence, and how the decisions made in moments of crisis echo through the centuries. Let us journey together through this alternate history, this road not taken, and discover a world where Rome endures. The crisis of the 3rd century, seeds of survival to understand how Rome might have survived. We must first understand why it fell in our timeline. The collapse of the Western Roman Empire was not a sudden event, but the culmination of centuries of mounting pressures. The crisis of the 3rd century from 235 to 284 CE Empire. In just 50 years, Rome had over 50 emperors, most of whom died violently. The frontiers collapsed under barbarian invasions, provinces broke away under usurper emperors, plague ravaged the population, inflation destroyed the economy, and civil war consumed the legions. Yet Rome survived this crisis, at least temporarily, through the reforms of emperors like Diocletian and Constantine. They divided the empire into more manageable administrative units, created a new military structure, moved the capital to Constantinople, and transformed the emperor from first citizen to absolute monarch. These reforms bought time, extending Rome's life by nearly 2 centuries in the East and almost 2 more in the West. But in our alternate timeline, let us imagine that the reforms went further, that the lessons were learned more deeply. The year is 410 CE, and the Visigothic king Alaric has just sacked Rome itself, the eternal city violated for the first time in 8 centuries. The shockwaves reverberate throughout the empire. In our timeline, this event signaled that Rome was vulnerable, mortal, finished. But what if instead it served as a wake-up call, forcing the Romans to make the hard choices necessary for survival? The reforms of Honorius. A new social contract emperor Honorius, young and previously weak-willed, is transformed by the crisis. Surrounded by advisors who understand that the old ways are finished, he institutes a series of radical reforms that will save the empire by fundamentally changing its nature. First and most crucial reform is the integration of the Germanic peoples. For centuries, Rome's relationship with the barbarian tribes beyond its borders had been one of alternating conquest and alliance, assimilation and rejection. Warriors served in the legions, rose to positions of command, even became consuls and generals. But they were always foreigners, always separate, never truly Roman. Their people, when they entered the empire as refugees or invaders, were settled in designated areas, permitted to maintain their tribal structures, but never fully integrated into Roman society. Honorius changes this. In a series of edicts issued between 411 and 415 CE, he offers full Roman citizenship to any Germanic warrior who swears loyalty to Rome and serves in the legions. More radically, he dissolves the legal distinctions between Romans and Germans, declaring that all free inhabitants of the empire, regardless of origin, are equally Roman. Tribal kings become Roman officials, their warriors become Roman soldiers, their people become Roman citizens. This is not mere tolerance or multiculturalism, but aggressive assimilation. Germanic children attend Roman schools, learn Latin alongside their native tongues, study Roman law and history. Mixed marriages are encouraged. The traditional Roman aristocracy initially resists, but they are pragmatic enough to see that adaptation is the price of survival. Within 2 generations, the distinction between Roman and German becomes meaningless. They are all simply Romans, united by law, language, and loyalty to the empire. The second crucial reform is military. The old legion system, based on heavy infantry fighting in tight formations, had made Rome master of the Mediterranean world. But it was increasingly obsolete against the mobile cavalry tactics of Huns, Goths, and other steppe peoples. Roman armies had been defeated again and again by mounted warriors who could strike and retreat faster than the legions could respond. Honorius and his generals learn from their enemies. They create a new Roman army that combines the discipline and organization that had always been Rome's strength with the mobility and striking power of cavalry. Germanic warriors raised on horseback become the core of this new force. The heavy cataphract cavalry, armored warriors on armored horses, become the elite of the Roman military, supported by light cavalry for reconnaissance and harassment, and infantry who can fight effectively whether mounted or on foot. The third reform is administrative decentralization. Diocletian had divided the empire into smaller administrative units, but he maintained the fiction of a unified empire under imperial control. Honorius goes further, creating a federal structure where provinces have genuine autonomy in local matters while remaining bound to Rome through oaths of loyalty, shared military obligations, and economic ties. Provincial governors, often from local aristocratic families, have real power to make decisions without waiting for directives from Rome or Constantinople. This federalism allows the empire to be more flexible and responsive. When a province faces invasion, its governor can mobilize local resources immediately rather than waiting months for orders from the distant capital. When economic or social conditions vary from region to region, provincial authorities can adapt policies to local circumstances. The empire becomes less a monolithic structure and more a network of semi-autonomous regions united by common institutions, laws, and identity. The economics of survival, military, and political reforms alone would not have saved Rome. The economic foundations of the empire had been crumbling for generations. Inflation had destroyed the currency, trade had declined, cities had shrunk, and the tax base had collapsed as the urban middle class disappeared. To survive, Rome needed economic revitalization. Honorius's advisors, drawing on the empire's long experience with commerce and administration, implement a series of economic reforms. First, they stabilize the currency by introducing a new gold solidus with strict weight and purity standards, backed by the empire's gold reserves and trade revenues. Unlike previous attempts at currency reform, this one works because it is accompanied by fiscal discipline. The government reduces military spending by making the new federal system more efficient, cuts the bureaucracy by eliminating redundant offices, and broadens the tax base by ending exemptions for the senatorial aristocracy. Second, they invest in infrastructure. Roman roads, aqueducts, and harbors, the physical networks that had bound the empire together, had been deteriorating for decades as resources were diverted to defend the frontiers. Now, with the military situation stabilized by the integration of Germanic warriors, resources can be devoted to rebuilding these networks. The roads are repaired, new harbors constructed, irrigation systems expanded. This infrastructure spending creates jobs, stimulates commerce, and makes the economy more productive. Third, they encourage technological innovation. The Romans had never been great innovators, preferring to adopt and refine technologies developed by others. But now, facing existential crisis, they become more open to new ideas. Watermills, which had existed but were little used, become widespread, increasing grain production and freeing human labor for other tasks. New agricultural techniques imported from Germanic and Persian sources improve crop yields. The empire becomes not just militarily and politically resilient, but economically dynamic. By the year 500 CN, the Roman Empire has stabilized and adapted, but it has also fundamentally changed. The crisis has passed, the reforms have taken hold, and a new Roman identity has emerged. Yet the empire faces a new reality. It has become, in effect, two empires sharing a common heritage, bound by tradition and mutual interest, but increasingly distinct in character and governance. The Eastern Roman Empire, centered on Constantinople, remains the wealthier, more populous, and more culturally Greek half. Its emperor, residing in the magnificent palace overlooking the Bosporus, commands the loyalty of provinces stretching from the Danube to Egypt, from the Adriatic to the Euphrates. The great cities of the East, Alexandria, Antioch, Jerusalem, continue to thrive as centers of learning, commerce, and Christian faith. Greek, not Latin, is the language of daily life, though Latin remains the official language of law and administration. The Western Roman Empire, with its capital still at Rome, though increasingly challenged by the rising importance of Milan and Ravenna, governs a territory that encompasses Italy, Gaul, Hispania, Britain, and North Africa. Here, Latin remains dominant, though regional languages and dialects flourish alongside it. The West is less urbanized, more militarized, and more influenced by the Germanic peoples who have become fully integrated into Roman society. Germanic names and customs blend with Roman traditions, creating a hybrid culture that is uniquely Western Roman. These two halves of the empire maintain close ties. They share a common legal system based on the codified Roman law, worship at Christian churches that recognize both Rome and Constantinople as centers of authority, and unite militarily when facing external threats. The emperors correspond regularly, coordinate policies, and occasionally marry into each other's families to strengthen bonds. Yet they are distinct realms, each responding to its own regional challenges and opportunities. The challenge of Islam, the 7th century, brings the greatest external threat since the Germanic migrations: the rapid expansion of Islam. In 634 CE, Arab armies united under the banner of the new faith explode out of the Arabian Peninsula. In our timeline, they conquered Syria, Egypt, and North Africa from the Byzantine Empire within decades, permanently severing the Christian Mediterranean world. In our alternate timeline, Rome still loses territory but not civilization. The Eastern Roman Empire, with its well-organized military and strong frontier fortifications, mounts a more effective defense. Syria falls after fierce fighting, but Egypt, with its crucial grain supplies and ancient cities, remains Roman after the decisive Battle of Alexandria in 642 CE, where Roman cataphract cavalry, learning from earlier defeats, smashed the Arab assault. The Western Roman Empire faces Arab expansion in North Africa. Here too, the Romans fight more effectively than in our timeline. The Berber peoples of North Africa, many of whom had been restive under Roman rule, are now more fully integrated into the empire through the federalist reforms. Many Berber leaders hold Roman offices and command Roman troops. When Arab armies invade, they face not a crumbling remnant of empire but a vigorous, well-defended frontier. North Africa becomes a contested zone, with Rome holding the coastal cities and major agricultural regions while Arab forces control the interior and desert regions. Eventually, after decades of warfare, a practical accommodation is reached. The Arabs recognize Roman sovereignty over the Mediterranean coast, while Rome acknowledges Arab control of the interior. Trade continues, religious pilgrims move between territories, and a complex coexistence develops. More importantly, the Islamic golden age of science, mathematics, and philosophy flourishes in close proximity to Roman civilization. Instead of the barriers that existed in our timeline, there is extensive intellectual exchange. Roman scholars learn Arabic and study Islamic texts on mathematics, astronomy, and medicine. Islamic scholars learn Latin and study the classical Greek and Roman text preserved in Roman libraries. The House of Wisdom in Baghdad and the Great Library of Constantinople engage in regular correspondence and exchange of manuscripts. This cross-pollination of ideas accelerates intellectual progress in both civilizations. Roman mathematicians adopt Arabic numerals and algebra, revolutionizing calculation and commerce. Islamic physicians build on Roman medical knowledge, particularly the works of Galen, while Roman doctors incorporate Islamic surgical techniques and pharmaceutical knowledge. The intellectual stagnation that characterized the early medieval period in our timeline is replaced by vigorous exchange and advancement. The Christian empire Christianity continues to be central to Roman identity. But the survival of a unified political structure affects how the religion develops. In our timeline, the fall of Rome in the West led to the emergence of the Catholic Church as an independent power, with the Pope claiming authority over temporal as well as spiritual matters. The Eastern Orthodox Church developed separately under the protection of Byzantine emperors. In our alternate timeline, with both halves of the empire surviving, the relationship between church and state evolves differently. The Pope in Rome and the Patriarch in Constantinople both wield great spiritual authority, but neither can claim independence from imperial power. The emperors, both East and West, styled themselves as protectors of the faith, conveners of church councils, and final arbiters in theological disputes. This does not mean the church is weak or merely a tool of the state. Bishops and abbots hold real power, control vast estates, and influence policy. Monasteries become centers of learning, preserving and copying classical texts, providing education, and maintaining charitable institutions. The church serves as a unifying force across the diverse regions of the empire, providing a common identity and shared values that transcend local differences. The major theological controversies that split Christianity in our timeline, the Great Schism between East and West, the Protestant Reformation, either do not occur or play out very differently. With strong emperors able to convene councils and enforce decisions, the church maintains greater unity. Theological disputes still arise, but they are resolved through imperial mediation rather than schism. The result is a Christianity that is both more unified and more diverse, encompassing a wider range of practices and beliefs under a common institutional structure. The preservation of knowledge, one of the most profound differences between our timeline and this alternate one, is the preservation of classical knowledge. In our timeline, the fall of Rome in the West led to the loss of much ancient learning. Libraries were destroyed, texts were lost, and literacy declined sharply. The works of ancient philosophers, science historians survived only in fragments preserved by isolated monasteries or transmitted through Arabic translations. In our alternate timeline, the great libraries of Alexandria, Constantinople, and Rome continue to function and grow. The tradition of classical education is maintained. While literacy rates remain low by modern standards, they are higher than in the medieval period of our timeline. Urban elites can read and write in both Latin and Greek, study the classics, and contribute new works to the tradition. More importantly, the Roman state maintains institutions dedicated to education and knowledge preservation. The imperial libraries employ scribes to copy important texts, ensuring multiple copies exist across the empire. State-funded schools in major cities provide education in grammar, rhetoric, logic, arithmetic, geometry, astronomy, and music, the traditional liberal arts. The University of Constantinople, founded in 425 CE, continues to operate and expands, becoming the greatest center of learning in the world, with thousands of students from across the empire and beyond studying philosophy, law, medicine, and theology. This preservation and expansion of knowledge creates a very different intellectual trajectory. The scientific method, glimpsed by ancient philosophers but never fully developed, begins to emerge earlier. Roman and Islamic scholars, working in dialogue, develop more sophisticated mathematical tools, more accurate astronomical observations, and more systematic approaches to medicine and natural philosophy. The foundations for what we call the scientific revolution are laid centuries earlier than in our timeline. Trade in the Mediterranean world, the survival of the Roman Empire, means the Mediterranean remains a unified trading zone. In our timeline, the fragmentation of the Mediterranean into Christian and Islamic realms, with constant warfare and piracy, severely disrupted trade and led to economic decline in Western Europe. The vibrant urban civilization of antiquity gave way to a more rural, agrarian society. In our alternate timeline, while warfare certainly occurs, it does not prevent trade. Roman and Arab merchants continue to exchange goods across the Mediterranean. Italian cities, Genoa, Venice, Naples, which in our timeline rose as independent trading powers, remain important but as Roman provincial centers rather than independent republics. Alexandria continues as a major trading hub, connecting the Mediterranean to the Indian Ocean trade routes. The economic vitality has important social and political consequences. Cities remain large and prosperous. A substantial middle class of merchants, artisans, and professionals exists throughout the empire. This urban middle class provides tax revenue, serves in local governance, and creates demand for manufactured goods and luxury items that stimulates economic growth. The feudalism that characterized medieval Europe in our timeline develops more weakly or not at all in the Roman Empire, because strong central authority and vibrant urban economies provide alternatives to the localized, land-based power structures of feudal society. The flowering of culture by the year 1000 CE, the Roman Empire has not merely survived, but has entered a new golden age. The cities of the empire are larger and more magnificent than ever. Constantinople, with over 500,000 inhabitants, is the greatest city in the world, its domed churches and marble palaces gleaming in the Mediterranean sun. Rome itself, having recovered from the dark centuries, once again approaches a population of several hundred thousand, its ancient monuments restored and new buildings rising alongside them. This is an age of cultural flourishing that historians in this timeline call the Roman Renaissance, though it differs significantly from the Renaissance of our timeline. Where our Renaissance was a rediscovery of classical learning after centuries of loss, this Roman Renaissance is a continuation and expansion of a tradition that never truly died. Roman scholars do not need to rediscover Plato and Aristotle through Arabic translations. They have been reading them in Greek all along. What is new is the synthesis of classical thought with Christian theology, Islamic philosophy, and their own innovations. The arts flourish under imperial and church patronage. Painters develop new techniques for creating perspective and capturing light, adorning church walls and imperial palaces with frescoes of stunning realism. Sculptors create works that rival the masterpieces of antiquity, drawing on both classical Roman traditions and Byzantine stylistic elements. Architects design buildings that combine Roman engineering, the arch, the dome, the vault, with new aesthetic sensibilities, creating structures that are both functional and beautiful. Literature thrives in both Latin and Greek. Poets write epics celebrating the empire's history and heroes, from the legendary founding by Romulus to the defense against Arab invasions. Historians chronicle contemporary events with increasing sophistication, analyzing causes and consequences rather than merely recording events. A poem. Playwrights revive the ancient dramatic tradition, writing both tragedies based on classical myths and comedies, satirizing contemporary society. The tradition of rhetoric, always central to Roman culture, reaches new heights as skilled orators debate philosophy, law, and politics in public forums. The printing revolution, the most transformative technological development of this era, is the invention of the printing press. In our timeline, Johannes Gutenberg invented movable type printing in Germany around 1440. In our alternate timeline, printing is invented somewhat earlier, around 1380, and in Rome itself. The inventor is a Roman craftsman named Marcus Fabricius, who has been experimenting with ways to reproduce texts more quickly and cheaply than hand copying. Working in a scriptorium attached to a monastery, Fabricius develops movable metal type and a press adapted from wine presses used throughout the Mediterranean. His first printed book is, appropriately, a Latin Bible, but he quickly moves on to printing classical texts, contemporary works, and practical manuals. The impact is revolutionary. Within a generation, printing presses spread throughout the empire. Books, which had been expensive luxuries affordable only to the wealthy and institutions, become relatively inexpensive. A merchant can own a small personal library. A scholar can access dozens or hundreds of texts rather than the handful available to previous generations. The printing press doesn't just make existing knowledge more accessible. It accelerates the creation of new knowledge by allowing scholars to build on each other's work more easily. The Roman government recognizes the importance of this invention and both encourages and regulates printing. Imperial printing offices in major cities produce official texts, laws, decrees, administrative manuals, ensuring standardization across the vast empire. Private printers produce everything else, subject to censorship by both imperial and church authorities, but with considerable freedom compared to what would exist in absolutist states of later centuries. The spread of printed books has profound effects on literacy and education. While literacy rates remain far below modern levels, they increase significantly, particularly among urban populations. Grammar schools proliferate, teaching children to read Latin, and in the East, Greek. The growing literate population creates demand for more books, which stimulates the printing industry, which makes books cheaper and more available, creating a virtuous cycle of expanding literacy and knowledge. The age of exploration, the Roman Empire, straddling the Mediterranean and extending from the Atlantic to the Levant, has always been a maritime civilization. Roman ships have sailed the Mediterranean for over 1,000 years, and Roman merchants have traded with distant lands via overland routes. But in the 14th and 15th centuries, Roman explorers begin to venture beyond the known world. The motivation is partly economic. The lucrative trade with the Far East, silk, spices, porcelain, passes through intermediaries, with each middleman taking a share of the profit. Roman merchants dream of finding a direct sea route to India and China, cutting out the intermediaries and maximizing profits. The motivation is also political and religious. The empire seeks new allies against its Islamic neighbors and rivals, hoping to find Christian kingdoms rumored to exist in Africa or Asia, and there is simple curiosity, the human desire to know what lies beyond the horizon. Roman shipbuilding has advanced considerably by this period. Drawing on centuries of Mediterranean sailing experience, contact with Arab and Viking shipbuilding traditions, and their own innovations, Roman shipwrights designed vessels capable of long ocean voyages. These carracks and galleons are larger, more seaworthy, and more maneuverable than previous ships, equipped with multiple masts, triangular lateen sails borrowed from Arab designs, and square sails for running before the wind. In 1418, Roman explorers sailing under imperial patronage begin to systematically explore the west coast of Africa. Each voyage ventures further south, establishing trading posts and mapping the coastline. In 1438, Roman ships round the southern tip of Africa, what they named Cape Boniface, the Cape of Good Hope, and enter the Indian Ocean. Within a decade, Roman merchants are trading directly with India, breaking the monopoly of Arab and Egyptian middlemen. But the most momentous voyage comes in 1452, when a Roman captain named Gaius Columba, inspired by ancient theories about the Earth's circumference and convinced that sailing west will reach Asia, convinces Emperor Constantine XIV to sponsor an expedition. Columba, with 3 ships and a crew of experienced sailors, departs from Gades, ancient Cadiz, and sails west into the unknown. After weeks at sea, far longer than expected, land is sighted. Columba believes he has reached the Indies, the eastern coast of Asia, and names the inhabitants Indians. He has, of course, discovered what will become known as the New World, though in this timeline it is claimed for the Roman Empire and will be called Nova Roma, New Rome. The discovery transforms everything. Here is an entire hemisphere previously unknown to Europeans, Africans, and Asians, home to diverse peoples with their own civilizations. The Aztec Empire in Mexico and the Inca Empire in Peru rival any state in the Old World in organization and achievement. Tens of millions of people live in the Americas, though their lack of immunity to Old World diseases will soon bring catastrophe. The Roman colonization of the Americas proceeds differently than the Spanish and Portuguese colonization in our timeline, though it is still devastating to indigenous people. The Roman Empire, with its long tradition of integrating conquered peoples, approaches colonization with a more assimilationist mindset. Native peoples who submit to Roman authority and convert to Christianity are, in theory, granted citizenship and protection under Roman law, though in practice they are often exploited and oppressed by colonial administrators and settlers. The wealth that flows to Rome from the Americas, gold, silver, and new crops like maize and potatoes, exotic goods, enriches the empire but also creates inflation and economic disruption. The sudden influx of precious metals devalues existing currency, hurting those on fixed incomes while benefiting debtors and merchants. The empire's economists, more sophisticated than in our timeline due to continuous development of classical economic thought, struggle to manage these challenges. The philosophy, the preservation of classical learning, the the intellectual exchange with Islamic civilization, the invention of printing, and the discoveries of the Age of Exploration all contribute to an acceleration of scientific progress. By the year 1500, Roman natural philosophers, what we would call scientists, have made significant advances beyond ancient knowledge. In astronomy, observers using increasingly sophisticated instruments have made detailed observations of the heavens. Building on the work of ancient Greek astronomers and medieval Islamic scholars, Roman astronomers have developed more accurate models of planetary motion. Some radical thinkers studying ancient heliocentric theories proposed by Aristarchus and others begin to question whether the Earth truly sits at the center of the universe or might instead orbit the sun. The question is debated in universities and intellectual circles, though church authorities eye such speculation with suspicion. In mathematics, the adoption of Arabic numerals and algebra centuries earlier has borne fruit. Roman mathematicians have developed sophisticated techniques for calculation, navigation, and engineering. The printing press allows mathematical text to spread widely, and a community of mathematicians across the empire corresponds regularly, sharing discoveries and building on each other's work. In medicine, Roman physicians combine the classical tradition of Galen with Islamic medical knowledge and their own observations. Hospitals, founded by Christian charity but increasingly sophisticated in their methods, provide opportunities for systematic study of disease and treatment. Anatomy advances through careful dissection and observation, though religious restrictions limit what can be studied. The development of the experimental method proceeds gradually, but inexorably. Natural philosophers increasingly emphasize observation and experiment rather than relying solely on ancient authorities or philosophical reasoning. This shift in methodology, combined with improved instruments, mathematical tools, and the ability to widely share results through printed books, sets the stage for the scientific revolution that will come in subsequent centuries. Building on centuries of accumulated knowledge, improved instruments, and the widespread distribution of ideas through printing, Roman natural philosophers make breakthrough after breakthrough that transform humanity's understanding of the natural world. In 1615, the Roman astronomer Galilius Ferrarius, using an improved telescope of his own design, observes the moons of Jupiter and the phases of Venus, providing strong evidence that not all celestial bodies orbit the Earth. His published observations, backed by mathematical calculations, reignite the heliocentric debate. After decades of controversy involving theologians, philosophers, and imperial authorities, the heliocentric model gradually gains acceptance, though the Church requires that it be presented as mathematical convenience rather than physical reality. In physics, Roman scientists discover the laws of motion and gravitation. The mathematician and physicist Isaac Newton, working in the University of Constantinople in the late 17th century, develops calculus independently and uses it to describe planetary motion, forces, and the behavior of physical systems with unprecedented mathematical precision. His work, Principia Naturalis, published in 1687, becomes the foundation of classical physics. Chemistry emerges as a distinct science, separating from alchemy. Roman chemists identify elements, discover gases, and begin to understand chemical reactions systematically. Biology advances through improved microscopes that reveal the cellular structure of life. Medicine becomes more scientific, with better understanding of disease transmission, though effective treatments remain limited. The Roman government, recognizing the practical benefits of scientific research, establishes the Imperial Academy of Sciences in 1670, modeled on informal scientific societies, but with state funding and official status. The Academy sponsors research, publishes scientific journals, awards prizes for important discoveries, and advises the government on technical matters. This institutional support accelerates scientific progress and establishes the empire as the world's leading center of scientific research. The industrial transformation, the accumulated scientific knowledge, combined with practical engineering experience, Roman organizational capabilities, and economic incentives, leads to the Industrial Revolution. It begins, as in our timeline, with textiles and steam power, but it unfolds somewhat differently in a Roman context. The first steam engines, developed in the early 18th century, are used to pump water from mines in Hispania and Britannia, where the empire's abundant coal deposits are located. Of engineers, many trained in Roman technical schools, improved these engines, making them more efficient and powerful. By the 1750s, steam engines are being used not just for pumping, but for driving machinery in textile mills, grinding grain, and powering blast furnaces for iron production. The Roman Empire's extensive road network, maintained for over a millennium, provides infrastructure for the initial stages of industrialization, but it soon becomes clear that something more is needed to move coal, iron, and manufactured goods in the quantities now being produced. In the 1770s, Roman engineers begin building railways, iron roads along which steam-powered locomotives pull trains of wagons. The first major railway, connecting the coalfields of Britannia to the port city of Londinium, opens in 1785, causing a sensation. Within decades, railways crisscross the empire, radically reducing transportation costs and travel times. Factories spring up in cities throughout the empire, drawing workers from the countryside. The ancient Roman cities, which had survived and grown gradually over the centuries, now experience explosive growth. Londinium, Alexandria, Constantinople, Rome itself, all double or triple in population within a few generations. This rapid urbanization creates social problems: overcrowding, poor sanitation, labor unrest, class conflict. The empire must adapt its institutions to manage industrial society. The Industrial Revolution also transforms warfare. Steam-powered warships replace sailing vessels, rifled firearms with standardized parts, mass-produced in imperial arsenals, equipped the legions. Railways allow rapid mobilization and deployment of forces. The empire's military power, always considerable, becomes overwhelming. When regional conflicts arise with neighboring powers, Roman industrial capacity proves decisive. Political evolution and reform, the social and economic changes brought by industrialization, create pressure for political change. The old imperial system, with power concentrated in the emperor and his appointed officials, struggles to manage the complexity of industrial society and the demands of an increasingly educated, politically conscious population. Throughout the 18th and 19th centuries, the empire undergoes gradual political reform. The process is neither smooth nor inevitable. There are periods of reaction and repression, but the general trend is toward greater representation and constitutional limits on imperial power. Provincial assemblies, which had existed primarily to collect taxes and provide auxiliary military forces, gain more authority over local matters. In some provinces, particularly in the West, these assemblies evolve into genuine legislative bodies with elected representatives. Urban guilds and commercial associations, representing the interests of merchants, manufacturers, and skilled workers, demand and gradually receive formal roles in governance. In 1848, a year of widespread unrest throughout the empire, Emperor Marcus Aurelius IV issues the Great Charter, a constitutional document that fundamentally reforms imperial governance. The charter establishes an imperial senate as a legislative body with members chosen by provincial assemblies. It guarantees certain civil rights, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of religion within Christianity, protection from arbitrary arrest. It limits the emperor's power, requiring Senate approval for new taxes, major treaties, and declarations of war, though the emperor retains significant executive authority and military command. The Great Charter does not create democracy as we know it. Voting rights are limited by property qualifications. Women are excluded from formal politics, and the emperor retains ultimate authority. But it establishes the principle of constitutional government and begins a process of political liberalization that will continue into the following century. Labor movements emerge as industrial workers organize to demand better wages, working conditions, and political rights, initially suppressed by imperial authorities and industrialists. These movements gradually gain acceptance. By the late 19th century, trade unions are legal in most provinces, and labor parties begin to win seats in provincial assemblies and the imperial senate. Social reforms, factory safety laws, limits on working hours, compensation for industrial accidents, public education are gradually implemented, often over fierce resistance from conservative elements. Global competition and colonial empire, the Roman Empire's industrial power allows it to dominate global affairs in the 19th century, but it is not unchallenged. Other nations and empires undergo their own industrial revolutions and compete for resources, markets, and territory. In the Far East, China, despite its ancient civilization and large population, struggles to industrialize and falls behind technologically. Roman merchants and missionaries penetrate China, securing trade concessions and establishing spheres of influence. Japan, isolated for centuries, suddenly opens to the world in the mid-19th century and rapidly modernizes, adopting Roman technology and institutions while maintaining its distinct culture. In the Americas, Nova Roma has developed its own identity distinct from the Old World Empire. The colonies, settled by Romans, Greeks, Germans, and others, and incorporating indigenous peoples in varying degrees, are prosperous and increasingly restive under imperial control. In 1776, drawing inspiration from the empire's own republican traditions and Enlightenment ideals, several American provinces declare independence. After a costly war, the empire reluctantly recognizes the independence of the United Provinces of Nova Roma, a federal republic that maintains cultural and commercial ties with the empire but governs itself. Africa, the third major theater of imperial expansion, presents different challenges. The empire controls North Africa and has coastal holdings elsewhere, but the interior remains largely independent. In the late 19th century, the scramble for Africa sees Roman colonial forces competing with other European powers to carve up the continent. Advanced weapons, railways, and steamships allow relatively small imperial forces to conquer vast territories. By 1900, most of Africa is under formal imperial control, though resistance continues in many regions. The colonial empire, spanning 6 continents, brings wealth and power to Rome, but also moral complications and administrative challenges. The exploitation of colonial peoples, the destruction of indigenous cultures, and the extraction of resources for the benefit of the imperial core create tensions that will eventually contribute to decolonization in the 20th century. On the eve of the modern age, by the year 1900, the Roman Empire stands at the height of its power. Its territory, including colonies and protectorates, covers nearly a quarter of the Earth's land surface. Its navy rules the seas. Its factories produce more manufactured goods than the rest of the world combined. Its scientists and inventors lead the world in innovation. Its currency is the global standard. Its language, Latin, is spoken by hundreds of millions and serves as the international language of diplomacy, science, and commerce. Yet beneath this imposing facade, tensions and contradictions accumulate. Nationalism challenges imperial unity as various ethnic groups seek autonomy or independence. Industrial workers demand political power and economic justice. Colonial subjects resist foreign rule. The empire's rivals grow stronger and more assertive. New technologies, electricity, internal combustion engines, heavier than air flight, radio, promise further transformation of society and warfare. The empire has survived and thrived for nearly 1,500 years since the crisis that almost destroyed it, adapting to each new challenge, incorporating new peoples and ideas, balancing tradition with innovation. But as the 20th century dawns, the empire faces perhaps its greatest test. Whether ancient institutions, however adapted and reformed, can navigate the storms of the modern age. The great wars and transformation, the 20th century brings unprecedented challenges that test whether the ancient empire can survive in the modern world. In 1914, a crisis in the Balkans, a region that has troubled Rome since ancient times, spirals into a devastating global conflict. The Great War, as it becomes known, pits the Roman Empire and its allies against a coalition of rival powers seeking to break Roman dominance. The war is more terrible than anything previously experienced. Industrial technology applied to warfare produces carnage on an unimaginable scale. Machine guns, poison gas, artillery, and aerial bombardment kill millions. The trenches stretch across Europe, and for 4 years neither side can gain decisive advantage. The population exceeds 500 million people, speaking dozens of languages but united by common institutions, shared history, and the lingua franca of Latin. which has evolved but remains recognizable to ancient Romans. The economy is highly developed, post-industrial, increasingly focused on services, technology, and information rather than manufacturing. Roman companies are global leaders in aerospace, pharmaceuticals, telecommunications, and financial services. The imperial currency, the modern solidus, is one of the world's major reserve currencies. Rome, Constantinople, Alexandria, and other ancient cities are gleaming modern metropolises with state-of-the-art infrastructure overlaying and incorporating their millennia-old monuments. Education is universal and highly developed, with the empire boasting some of the world's best universities, direct descendants of institutions founded centuries or even millennia ago. The University of Constantinople, founded in 425 CE, is now one of the world's premier research institutions. Literacy is universal, and citizens are generally well-educated, multilingual, and globally connected through the internet, a technology to which Roman computer scientists contributed significantly. Healthcare is advanced and accessible, provided through a mix of public and private systems. The empire's citizens enjoy long life expectancy and high standards of living, though inequality remains a persistent challenge. The social safety net, developed gradually over the past century, provides unemployment insurance, retirement pensions, and basic income guarantees, reflecting the ancient Roman tradition of providing bread and circuses to maintain social stability, now adapted to modern sensibilities. A diverse empire, perhaps the greatest challenge facing the modern empire, is maintaining unity amid diversity. The empire has always been multicultural. Greeks, Romans, Germans, Africans, Arabs, and countless others have contributed to Roman civilization over the centuries. But modern communications and the persistence of local identities create centrifugal pressures that the empire must carefully manage. Some provinces, particularly in the West, maintain strong regional identities and occasionally flirt with independence movements. Referendums on autonomy or independence occur periodically, with the empire generally respecting results while working to demonstrate the benefits of remaining within the larger whole. The European provinces sometimes chafe under what they see as excessive centralization, while Mediterranean provinces fear losing influence to their more populous northern neighbors. The empire has responded by becoming increasingly federal, devolving power to provincial and local governments while maintaining central authority over defense, foreign policy, currency, and interstate commerce. This balancing act requires constant negotiation and adjustment, but it has largely succeeded in maintaining unity while respecting diversity. Rome in the global community. The Roman Empire is not the world's sole superpower in this timeline, but it is one of several major powers that shape global affairs. It cooperates and competes with other great nations, participates in international organizations, and works to address global challenges from climate change to economic inequality to pandemic diseases. The empire's ancient tradition of law has evolved into a sophisticated legal system that influences international law. Roman lawyers and judges serve on international tribunals. The empire is a strong proponent of rules-based international order, unsurprising for a civilization that has always valued law and order. Culturally, the empire remains enormously influential. Latin, though evolved, is widely studied as a second language. Roman architecture, art, philosophy, and literature form part of the global cultural heritage. Roman films, music, and television programs are consumed worldwide. The Olympics, revived in the late 19th century, remain a major international event, with the empire hosting the games regularly in its ancient and modern stadiums. Reflections on continuity. As we conclude our journey through this alternate history, we might pause to reflect on what it means that Rome never fell. Would the world truly be better if one empire had endured for 2 millennia? Would human progress have been faster, or would the weight of tradition have stifled innovation? Would the world be more unified and peaceful, or would ancient institutions have proven unable to handle modern challenges? There are no simple answers. This alternate Rome has been a force for both good and ill, preserving knowledge, maintaining order, and facilitating trade and cultural exchange, but also engaging in conquest, oppression, and exploitation. It has adapted to survive, but adaptation has transformed it beyond recognition, so that the modern empire shares little with ancient Rome except name, symbols, and a sense of connection across the centuries. Perhaps the lesson is simply this: civilizations are not destined to fall if they can adapt to changing circumstances, if they can balance tradition with innovation, if they can incorporate new peoples and ideas rather than resisting them. Rome fell in our timeline not because it had to, but because it failed to adapt sufficiently to the crises of the 3rd, 4th, and 5th centuries. In our alternate timeline, it succeeded in adapting, and the empire endured. Conclusion: dreams of Rome as sleep now approaches, and this long journey through an imagined history comes to its end. Let your mind drift peacefully through the centuries we have traversed. From crisis and reform in the 5th century to global power in the 20th, from ancient amphitheaters to modern spaceports, from toga-clad senators to suit-wearing parliamentarians, the thread of Rome stretches unbroken. In this alternate world, when you visit Rome, you walk streets that have been continuously inhabited for nearly 3,000 years, where ancient monuments are not ruins but maintained landmarks of a living civilization. When you use currency, you spend solidi issued by an empire that has coined money for millennia. When you study law, you learn from a legal tradition that traces directly back to the 12 tables. The past is not past, but present, woven into every aspect of daily life. Whether such a world would be better or worse than our own, we cannot truly know. But imagining it reminds us that history is not inevitable, that the choices made by individuals and societies in moments of crisis shape the future in profound ways, and that the civilizations we think of as eternal and unchanging were always adapting, always evolving, always choosing between different paths. Sleep now and dream of Rome, ancient and modern, fallen and eternal, real and imagined. Dream of marble columns and glass skyscrapers, of legions and parliaments, of emperors and citizens, of an empire that lasted not 5 centuries but 5,000 years. Let the weight of these imagined centuries lull you into peaceful rest, knowing that history, like the future, contains infinite possibilities. The journey is complete, the story is told. Rest well in the shadow of eternal Rome.